For Victims and Villains, my name is Josh, and today we are dissecting the mental health behind the slasher, Dolly. So Dolly is the latest film from Shudder and IFC to get the theatrical treatment. If you would like to check out our spoiler-free thoughts on it, click up here and check it out. But in this video, we are going to be diving in to talk about major spoilers. The movie has been out for roughly about a week now. Review's been out for nearly 2 weeks. And in this video, we're really going to talk about the mental health behind our titular character. If you guys are new to our content at Victims and Villains, hi, hello. My name is Joshua. I am the founder of Victims and Villains. And this is a mental health moment. This is a moment where we talk about a theme of mental health from the film which we're reviewing, talk about it for a few moments in the hopes to deconstruct the stigma surrounding mental health. And as I already mentioned, in this one, we're talking about the slasher, Dolly. If you guys have not had a chance to see Dolly yet, click the links in the show notes below to check your local listings. This is your official spoiler warning. Dolly addresses grief from two different angles. One that we find most commonly kind of throughout the modern age of horror that we are currently experiencing, where a character experiences grief very early on in the film, and it's kind of showing a character's journey of how their mental health is affected by said grief and how they are processing it. And the other facet of grief is one that I feel like we don't either talk about nearly enough or that we don't nearly see enough, and that's actually the grief of the loss of a relationship that is important to another character within the movie, or perhaps the main character in the movie. First, I want to address the more common use of grief that we find in more modern horror, as I previously mentioned. Max the Impaler is a wrestler turned actor, and they do an incredible job within this film, especially conveying the level of grief that their character experiences from the first moments that we meet them up until their final moments within the film. When we talk about grief and grief as a storytelling exploration of a character, we most commonly kind of see it more on the healthier side of things than we do in this film. And much like we talked about in Hoppers, grief is not a linear journey. It is going to affect different people in different aspects. And the refreshing thing about Dolly is that it shows us how losing someone very close to us, especially someone that was a parental figure in our lives, actually can bring us down some dark paths. And so with that said, Dolly almost feels kind of like a cautionary tale for mental health. Because while there is no right or wrong way to grieve, kind of creating a body count definitely seems like a wrong approach to the grieving process. Now, as a horror fan and as a mental health advocate, maybe I'm reaching to kind of connect these worlds a little bit closer together, but typically within the horror genre, we oftentimes find that it's the final girl that kind of gets to experience this grief or this trauma exploration with, things like Sidney Prescott or Laurie Strode. I think about my own story and how at 17 I became a suicide loss survivor, and that singular experience really rewrote the trajectory of my own life and actually brought me here to create content like what you're watching today. Very similarly, we see that here with Dolly and the trajectory that we find this couple throughout the course of this film, kind of this almost intersection of grief and happiness. And on the flip side of that, we also present this relationship that by the end of the film, now you are having a final girl that is now grieving the loss of a relationship. Which from a storytelling perspective is really refreshing, because I feel like we don't get enough of that in horror. I feel like it's such a heavy emphasis on sex and not enough on romance, and I liked that this film really approached the subject of a relationship from a romantic standpoint. Here you have a couple where a man literally in the beginning of this film is taking this girlfriend to propose to her, and she knows it. There is a scene very early on in this movie where she says, "Hey, I think I saw this ring," I'm kind of freaking out. These are my feelings. And then she's given the ring, and throughout the course of this whole entire ordeal with Dolly, she holds it close, but ultimately at the end, has this bittersweet moment where she both survives Dolly, but also has to end up sacrificing the love of her life. And I love that the final moments of this film is both a nod to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974, but also a very honest depiction of what it's like to process such big emotions in such a rushed state of mind. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to sit down with a couple of gentlemen to talk about how marriage affects your mental health, but also at the same time, how divorce affects your mental health, and then ultimately how relationships affect your mental health. And the relationship counselor that I sat down with for the interview about relationships and mental health talked about how when we grieve the loss of someone, it has this profound impact on us, and it can bring out some really severe emotions and very large feelings. On the flip side of that, the same thing happens when you grieve a relationship. The end of a relationship is the end of an era for you. You need to approach the relationship in the same way that you would approach any other subjects of grief throughout the course of your life. And though this movie might not have landed for me as well as I wanted it to, I do think this movie shows a very honest depiction of what it's like to actually grieve a relationship and be in the very early stages of shock, kind of coming into play with it. If you or someone you know is struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, please click the link in our show notes below. Check out our mental health resource library. Dolly is now playing in theaters everywhere from IFC and Shudder. Please click the links to check out our spoiler-free review if you guys haven't yet so far done so. But until next time, remember to keep it classy, keep it spooky. Have a great night.